Now that we have the Jesuit order having taken over the fiefdoms, very little has effectively changed in terms of progression from the Middle Ages until now. The only thing that has really changed is technology. We are effectively living in technocratic feudalism. It's feudalism in the same way that the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages were feudalism, but it's feudalism plus corporations and plus technology. Even so, even with this technology and a technocratic society, we can't rise from our places as serfs. We still remain down at the bottom of the heap, especially those of us who have been in psychiatric wards or been on strong drugs. We are literally cast to the bottom of the bottom, almost as a underclass that society would rather hide. You see the way people look at you in the street, and it shows that they've been infected by the mind parasite. They've lost all compassion, and it's because they know that they're actually no better than us, and that they're stuck in the same wheel of feudalism, and that their lives are a drudgery. But they see us, they're taught to see us as useless eaters. That is the term that the depopulationists would like them to use. And indeed, with the reintroduction of that term into mainstream vocabulary, it's obviously a sign that we're entering a phase whereby we may soon see sterilization of schizophrenics, manics, neurotics. And if we see sterilization, we could see then extermination. So we could be entering a particular period of history that could be repeating the Nazi T4 program, which isn't going to be so great for me, or those like me. But it's just more proof that this society has a level of creeping fascism attached to it. I mean, the ingenuity of the system to be able to change hippiedom from free love and hope and light and harmony into a fascist street movement that protect and defend the police state and deny free speech is absolutely ingenious. The system has managed to create fascist groups out of what would seem to be the least fascist entities in society. It shows that the Combine possesses some sheer ingenuity. Indeed, it's not necessarily a new phenomenon. They've always used controlled opposition. Take the Cold War. The Cold War was dictated to from Georgetown University. The Jesuits resident at Georgetown University controlled the foreign policies of both the United States of America and Russia, because Russia, the Soviet Union, was nothing more than a Jesuit experiment conducted by Jesuits resident at Georgetown. And Georgetown is so important because Georgetown also continues to dictate American foreign policy. And there are tunnels that lead from Georgetown to the White House. And it is within those tunnels, within that complex warren of tunnels, that most of the geopolitical decisions of the American government are made. And indeed, this web of tunnels is also mimicked here in Wiltshire. There is a web of tunnels that has been being created since the 1550s, 1560s, during the beginning of the period of persecution of Catholics by Elizabeth I, and many rich families that had remained Catholic despite outwardly seeming Protestant had built priest tunnels and monk tunnels and priest holes, whichever way you describe it. And this led to a complex warren of tunnels between the houses of Catholic dynasties, and also the tunnels now reach to very important positions such as Porton Down, maybe Salisbury Cathedral, Lakeock Abbey, and of course the Cecil family house, the Hatfield House in Hampshire, and the epicenter is Bowood House in Wiltshire, which is where the Mi6 War-rooms are. Indeed, the what is now the Petty Fitzmaurice family, the Marquis of Lansdowne. That family has controlled British intelligence for over 300 years, and indeed it was Lord Shelburne, who was Prime Minister in the early 1780s. By the late 1780s, he was dictating the French Revolution, and indeed he was patronizing Jeremy Bentham, who created the Panopticon, which was a form of prison system where you only needed a handful of guards, and it was in a certain shape that the guards could see exactly what was going on from all angles, and there could be absolutely no escape from the Panopticon. So maybe the Panopticon is potentially a good way of describing the society we dwell in today, as we do dwell in a society where our freedom of speech is being taken away bit by bit, and as our freedom of speech is chipped away at, thus our freedom of thought begins to disintegrate also. So within 2 or 3 years we're going to be living in a society of mindless slaves, and that's exactly what the powers that be want. They want to recreate the Jesuit style reductions as the Jesuits had in Paraguay when they enslaved the Guarani Indians, and indeed they kept them high on coca leaf to keep them from rebelling. And I don't doubt that soon there's going to be some sort of wonder drug, some wonder pharmaceutical drug that the authorities will hand to the serfs, and they will merely consume and ingest this drug and be completely content to be slaves. A similar situation to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, I suppose, but an even more extreme scale. Regarding Aldous Huxley, anyway, many people believe he was some sort of countercultural icon because of the doors of perception, but he wasn't. His family were all eugenicists, and undoubtedly he was a eugenicist. He believed in the divine right of aristocracy, and he believed in selective breeding, genetic engineering, and that the aristocracy should rule in absolute power over the mass of serfs. Thus he was a proponent of mass mind control, and indeed he was very influential within the MK-Ultra circles to the MK-Ultra movement. The doctors and the scientists that were involved in the MK-Ultra movement deferred a lot to Huxley, because Huxley's teachings were perfect for what the ideologues behind the MK-Ultra program wished to achieve. And thus, alas, I am going to tell you that Aldous Huxley was not a countercultural icon at all. He was one of them. I use them as a slight word, you know. Yeah, as in them. But as I've discussed many times, for me the highest echelons of them is the Jesuit Illuminati axis, the Alumbrados, their original plans for world dominion, which were carried on by the works of Weishaupt, which were actually plagiarized by Marx and twisted by Marx into Marxism, which gradually grew into Marxist-Leninism, which became the ideology with which the Jesuits experimented on Soviet Russia, and especially they brought forth Stalinism. Stalin was trained at Tiflis University. Tiflis University was a Jesuit university in Georgia, and undoubtedly Stalin was Jesuit trained, thus he may actually have been a Jesuit priest, so we should be referring to him as Joseph Stalin S.J. But returning to the MK-Ultra program, a lot of it was carried out by psychiatrists and doctors that had been brought to America during Operation Paperclip. And indeed, that strain of Nazi science continues today with pharmaceutical companies. It's still Nazi science. Indeed, I don't doubt that many of the scientists at Porton Down are descendants of scientists who were brought to Britain during Operation Paperclip. And it's beyond me what's going on in that complex. It's only 15 miles south of here or so. Apparently there are tunnels that lead through devices to Porton Down, and apparently they're up to all sorts there, mutants, genetic mixing, trying to mix different animals together. They've got diseases there, you know, in jars, synthetic drugs that they're testing on the population, nerve agents, nerve gases, all sorts. And if our government was truly a benevolent government, why would they feel the need to have a top secret institution such as Porton Down? Why do they need that secrecy if they were really working for our benefit? If the government were working for the people, if the government wanted to perfect and progress the lives of their subjects, then why the hell would they build secret chemical weapons and biological weapons factories? And everybody who works there, from the top managerial positions to the lowest cleaner positions, are sworn to silence. So, tell me, why is this? This is a continuation of the fact that Britain has always been papal because of the concessions of King John, which I've gone through before. And the basic story of that is that there was a succession crisis within the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Pope wished Stephen of Langford to become the Archbishop of Canterbury, but King John blocked and vetoed that decision, as he wished to put his own puppet in as the Archbishop of Canterbury. So Pope Innocent III put England under an interdict and excommunicated King John. So by 1213, King John was forced to make certain concessions. The first concessions he made were to give England its land, its population, and its holdings to the Pope as papal fiefdom. And 2 years later, King John signed the Magna Carta. By signing the Magna Carta, he'd gone against the rules of the concessions that he'd made to Pope Innocent III. So he was forced to make even further concessions in 1215 to add to the land, England, the land, the population, and its holdings. To add to that, he was forced to concede the crown corporation, the throne, and the monarchy. So, ever since then, the British monarchy has been dictated by the Pope, and the people have been serfs of Rome. But it's not just the white Pope anymore. It's not Pope Innocent III kind of character. These days it's Pope Francis, who is a Jesuit, but it's not Pope Francis who Britain, the vassal, says so. Ever since 1814, the Jesuits have been the papacy. Thus, ever since 1814, the concessions that were made to Pope Innocent III are now relevant to the Jesuits. So the Jesuits are those who rule the fiefdoms of Britain and America. America, because it's a corporation. It was built forth from the Virginia Company and is a corporation under Jesuitical rule. So it's a vassal, it's a fiefdom in the same manner that Britain is a fiefdom. The feudal structure is much more obvious in Britain than it is in America, but in America the feudal system is still in existence. Indeed, all of those foolish patriots who talk about the Constitution being this God-given ideal, this God-given, this God-given code really are absolutely foolish, because the Constitution was only introduced to protect the aristocracy of America. The aristocracy that were themselves beholden first to the monarchy of Britain still, despite the War of Independence, and then to the Pope. And of course with 1814 that loyalty changed from the figure of the white Pope to the figure of the black Pope, and indeed in this day and age the black Pope is Arturo Sosa S.J. And thus we are the fief. We dwell in the fiefdoms of Arturo Sosa S.J. and there's very little we can do about it. And anybody who is aware of it is cast out to the side, and people are just seen as nuts. Why would a charter that dates back to 1213 or 1215 matter in the modern world? It's because that charter, the charters of the concessions of 1213 and 1215, have never been rescinded. Thus they still stand. And because the Jesuits control the papacy, now it's the Jesuits who are the legitimate rulers of Britain and the United States. And interestingly, who are the two biggest nations with the biggest military might? The United Kingdom and the United States. And that's for a reason. That's for carrying out papal geopolitics. Whatever the Jesuits want doing around the world, they have an army, mercenary army, in the US Army and the UK Armed Forces. They are the mercenaries of the Jesuit order, who will do what they say. Afghanistan, a war for drugs and lithium. Iraq, a war for oil. Syria, a war they want to keep continuing because of the ecstasy trade. The ecstasy that's synthesized in Israel mainly goes through Syria, and the groups who take it through Syria are mainly Iraqi Catholics, and that whole route is run by the Medici and Massimo families. They patent the Cosa Nostra in those parts of the world because every drugs mafia pays tithes to the high Jesuit families. And the penultimate truth about Syria is that that war is going on for the sake of the ecstasy trade, as all the ecstasy is being synthesized in Israel, then taken across through Syria, because Syria is so lawless now. If tithes are needed to pay warlords or extremist groups, for instance, then the Mi6 or the Jesuit handlers of the Iraqi Catholic mafiosa will stump up the tithes and the tributes, and once it's through Syria into Turkey, it either goes up into the Caucasus and into Russia, or west up through the Balkans and into Europe, and eventually to Britain. But the penultimate truth about the Syrian war is that it's all being fought over ecstasy, but not very many people are aware of that. And if you were going to declare that in the street, people would just think you were a nutter. Indeed, if you started spouting about how we're still the slaves of the papacy, thereby the Jesuits, people would also consider you a nutter. So people think we're living in the land of freedom. Oh, how deluded they are. Anyway, I'm done for now. I'm going to fade out.